could all rise and say the pledge of allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In light of the fact that we've had some recent world events that are pretty tragic, can we just have a moment of silence to reflect on what's happened in Paris? Thank you. Our first order of business today is a public hearing to discuss our intention capital improvement project.
Absolutely, I'll actually turn it over. Now we're kind of a business official and our architects here to just give a brief overview of the capital project and the scope of it, and it's all yours.
Yes, tonight we have with us Young and Wright, our architects, Jim Hickey, Jerry Young from Young and Wright. Tonight is our public hearing for the capital project vote, which is scheduled to take place December 8th. So it's really an opportunity for anyone to ask any questions. We'll answer those the best we can at this point in time. So we'll get started. I'll let Jerry start. I'll click for you.
All right. It's a pretty straightforward project. It is just the HVAC, the boilers and controls at the Windermere. As part of the previous discussion, it was part of the original project that was approved by the State Education Department, and that's why we're going out with it with a positive referendum. We'll be able to do the work this summer. Turner is still on site finishing up the 2012 capital project, and it will roll right into that scope of work. The other part of it is the unit ventilators, and they will be replaced. Okay, the unit ventilators. The units along the windows as part of this, as was done with Smallwood. So the scope is pretty much the same. This project is approved, so we can avoid the 42-week waiting period at the State Education Department and get it done this summer. So with voter authorization, we're ready to go. Schedule-wise, the referendum, as Melanie said, will be December 8th. We would be ready to bid in December of 2015. We're coming back to the board in 16 with recommendations and ready to do the work, some of the work over the spring breaks. Financial, I'm going to turn over to Melanie.
The total cost, the budget for this project is $4.35 million. We are eligible for state building aid at a rate of 75.7% currently. So the annual local share on this would be $82,535, or 0.24% on our current levy. So some examples, property with assessed values of $100,000, $150,000, $200,000. The annual impact of this project, $5.47, $8.21, or $10.95. And then we broke it down to a daily cost to pennies, virtually pennies, 1.5 cents to 3 cents, again, depending on the assessed value of the property. So right now, let's open up to any questions and answers. And again, the vote is scheduled Tuesday, December 8th. A little different from our typical annual vote is the hours. I want to point that out specifically. It'd be noon to 9 p.m. for this particular vote. Same location, the Amherst South Gym, High School South Gym. So we hope that everybody can come out and vote that day. Are there any questions?
So the total cost of the project is $4.3 million, $4.35 million. Has that gone up since?
We were approximately about, I think it was about 3.2, 3.4, but it has gone up since it was originally bid in 2000. Well, the original project was 2012, so it's gone up some. I think it was about 3.5 back then in construction cost.
And is that labor, is it parts, what's the?
It's a combination of everything. We've been seeing with all the development in the area, what we saw with this current project, the bids came in higher in some of the areas, so just the cost has gone up because supply and demand. One thing that we did notice with this last project too is we're getting more companies from like the Rochester area coming out to bid, which we never saw before. So that's helpful. It's bringing, more business into the area. But yeah, the cost of building and doing such things has gone up since when we bid this current project. It was 2011, 2012 when we did that bid. So, and then we figure by the time this work starts over this summer.
Yeah, you're probably looking at about 3%. Construction costs have gone up about 3% a year, so you're looking at 10%, which is about the rate of it. Other questions?
Yeah, I have several questions. Could you go back? Jim Gramke from Ruskin Road.
To which side?
The one that had the state aid. If we're getting state aid of 75%, how is the local share only 82,000? Wouldn't it be more like 1.3 million?
Well, we spread it out over a number of years, the borrowing. So we pay back the loan.
Okay, but the total would be closer to 1.3.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
This is the annual.
Yeah.
The annual local amount would be that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess a couple other points too, for getting back to Mr. Vivolo's point, was actually I think back in January of 14 when it was stated that the project was over cost by 3.5 million. So it's maybe 2 years ago that we were 3.5 million over, and now we're about $1 million over. So that's pretty big jump in.
Now we're about what? I'm sorry.
Well, we were at 3.5, now we're at 4.4 in about a span of just under 2 years. So there's $1 million increase since January of 2014.
Yes, but that was just the construction cost. That was not. There was no other costs associated with that. Was pure construction cost. And when you're doing a project like this, there is incidental charges.
It's incidentals. That's a lot of incidentals.
Yes, but typically incidentals are between 15 and 20% on a project like this. That's a very common number. Actually, the state allows you between 20 and 25% for incidental charges. So
Okay.
we look at
Do,
those
do you have a breakdown of what the cost overruns are due to the higher bids? I think back in 2014, you indicated we were seeing higher bids in the 10 to 15% range. You also indicated, I think back then, there were some scope changes. I know that, I think it was Smallwood, we decided to replace all the windows at Smallwood rather than just the portion that had been originally in the budget. And then I think there were some other scope changes. So, Dr. Carousel, I don't know if there's any kind of a breakdown between increased bids, scope changes, and then the increased costs on this. Is there anything? Because this original project, I think, was 10.2 million, and we're at 4.4 million overrun.
As I recall, I'll address this to you, there was a change where the original project, we were going to kind of retrofit some of our furnaces.
Right.
Tell me if I'm wrong. And then once we got into it, we decided that it made more financial sense, even though it was going to cost more up front, to not put a Band-Aid on, but just do
Right.
what we needed to do it right the first time. And this is really why we're here tonight,
Right.
correct?
And
It's
some of that
not really
had,
cost overruns as much
Yes.
as it is just recognizing that this was a better use of taxpayer money to make these different, more complete changes rather than, like, as I
Right.
said, put a Band-Aid on.
and
So I think that might be really what we're addressing right here is that we decided that it was really better for the taxpayer to do it this way, even though it wasn't what was originally intended.
Specifically, we were talking about the piping, the unit ventilators, which we talked about, and the boilers were part of the original scope. But when we changed, we changed the piping, and then the piping got into the asbestos that was associated with it, and that's where some of the costs grew with that part.
So we have a better outcome, even though it's costing us more money now, and we won't have to pay that later in another capital project.
Yes,
That's
because you're
also-
replacing the whole
Also,
system.
time. That's the other issue, is it's already approved. Otherwise, we'd have to go through the whole process again of waiting that period of time.
But I'm talking about what we did in Smallwood,
Correct.
which
Yes.
ended up costing us more money, but in the long run, was a more efficient way to get to where we needed to be, rather than make half changes now and then 5 years from now have to make more half changes.
Good
or
idea. Do it
other
right the
change.
first
Do it
time.
right the first time. So I
Instead
think,
of-
Mr.
yeah.
Granke, that's what some of what all this is about, rather than simple cost overruns or escalations.
But you don't have any kind of a schedule that breaks that down?
Not in front of
No, not
Oh,
with us right now.
okay. Question, how much is the project manager getting paid for the project? And is there gonna be any additional payments to them based on this additional 4.4 million that's being added?
With the construction manager and the architect, there are some fees built into this particular project, because obviously the architect is designing it and helping us do the scope with the bids. The construction manager is gonna be on site, they're gonna be making sure that the project is done to the specifications and fulfilling the entire scope. So yes, there are some expenses with the architect and the construction manager
Okay,
within
so,
this.
sorry.
As well as within, Mr. Young mentioned about the incidental fees. Within that incidental, not only do we have those two professional services, but we also have attorneys. We also have our bond counsel, which helps us out with the borrowings and those types of things. So that's some of the components that make up that incidental piece as well.
Okay, so that would also add to the
That's
the
within-
additional cost,
yeah,
right? That's, okay.
That's correct.
That could be part of the difference between the 3.5 and the 4.4
Yeah.
that we're,
Mainly though, it's 3 years later, and we're looking at doing this, and, just like with anything, our own grocery bills at home, for example, you're paying more, today than you were 3 years ago.
okay.
Just prices are going up.
Do you know how much of this new heating system is gonna be made or manufactured in either New York State or the US?
That's a good question. I actually don't have, we have specifications because of municipal law that require us to have 3 alternatives. So we could have 2 or 3 boilers that are made in the US, but there's no guarantees that the contractor isn't gonna bring in and use the 3rd boiler. So I can't really give you an answer to that question, because municipal law requires it to be open to bidders, and they could buy it anywhere they want. There is nothing written in our specifications that limits them to, because we wouldn't be allowed to do that by the
Okay.
state education department.
Okay, but would you try to keep it to New York State if you could, or?
You can't. That's municipal
Well,
law will not allow
Well, I
us.
thought they encouraged you to buy within New York State. Not forced you to, but encouraged you to.
We have written the specifications potentially that way, but we cannot force a contractor. They can
Okay.
bid whatever they want.
Okay,
So it's an equal.
okay. What, do you know, will the work be done by union workers?
They're gonna pay prevailing wages, which is union wages, so union contractors can bid on it as competitively as non-union.
Okay,
So, again, we don't know who the contractor's gonna pay for.
okay,
It will be prevailing wages.
okay. What, do you anticipate the new system being more efficient, and would there be any cost savings related to the fuel and maintenance with this new system?
There will be. I don't know what the percentage will be, but definitely you will have a higher efficiency boiler, better efficiency, unit ventilators, and piping and insulation. So that whole system should improve as part of this.
Okay. I just have really just two more questions. Did the district get clarification about the new turf? I know there's been some discussion about replacing the turf, and we were.
This is
No,
not part of it.
Well, but this gets to my question: is why wouldn't you have gotten clarification and made the replacement of the turf part of this if you could have.
It would require SED approval, additional approval, and we would have to wait 40+ weeks. It's a separate, it would be a separate project,
Okay,
separate items.
so, but had you done that, you also would have gotten state funding for that.
Well, yes, but it has to be tied to the project, so you can't do it as part of this project.
But
You'd have to
you
do a project.
replaced the bleachers in the, you know.
And that was part of the high school
Right.
project.
Well,
As long as it's with the high school, you can do it, but this is.
Well, it is part, the field is part of the high school.
But this is Windermere. This is not related to that field at all. So it's not, this referendum couldn't have added the turf.
Okay. Okay, just one other comment, was made mention at I think one of the meetings in October that there was a capital reserve of $500,000 that was approved back in 2007. I went back and I looked, and back in 2012, the balance in that fund was $878,000, and then that was reduced to $595 in 2013, but I couldn't find what that was spent on. Couldn't see anything in the financials, and then it was reduced further to $500,000. So, is there any kind of explanation as to why the reserve went down? It seems like it may have gotten mixed in with this new project.
This is not part of this project, this is not part of this public hearing, so we're gonna have to ask you to.
So you don't have an answer for that then?
It's not part of this
Not
project.
It's not, okay, that's your answer is no answer. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Nope, we'll just go further into the meeting.
We have no written communication, but we do have one speaker who has signed in and asked to speak. And as you know, if you sign in prior to the meeting, you're able to speak for 3 minutes. And this is an opportunity for the board to hear what you have to say, but it is not an opportunity for discussion. So our one speaker is Mr. James Granke. Could you please?
I thought I was signing in for the public hearing.
Oh, okay,
Okay.
so we're all set. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so there's no one wishing to speak, so we will get back right into report of special committees. Do we have any reports of special committees? Anyone wants to speak?
Sorry, I just want to say the technology committee would have met today, but in light of changes in the technology department, we did not hold that meeting.
Okay.
As you know, you and I have originally started work on a new superintendent evaluation tool. Because of Dr. Carousel's workload, Mr. Steinle has elected to take over her role, and so he and I will be working together to continue moving forward with the development of the new tool. And we're meeting first week of December with a local company that has created software that is a superintendent evaluation tool online. So we're going to be meeting with them and seeing what their tool looks like in comparison to the one that we're looking to move forward with.
Great. Thank you. And just an update for everyone about the superintendent search. Dr. Katie informed me that she only has 5 meetings left. I cannot believe it. So now it's 4.5. But anyway, so we're currently interviewing candidates for an interim superintendent position to begin on February 1st and go continue until we have a permanent superintendent identified and hired. And the anticipated start date for the superintendent, as you know, is July 1st, 2016, or as early as we can, or as early as practical. So just to let everyone know where we are in the process. Okay? Thank you. Oh, yes, focus groups happened on Friday. We had 7, Dr. Coppola, our consultant, had 7 focus groups on Friday. He's quite the Energizer bunny. I don't know how he does it. And we had close to 70 people who came. I think they were very appreciative of the opportunity to have a voice, to be able to participate. And Dr. Coppola said that he has, gathered a lot of good information that he'll share with us. So I'm looking forward to that, and that will be shared with the board prior to our meeting on Monday.
All right, okay.
Thank you.
We're gonna start this evening, we're gonna begin talking about the veterans tax exemption. Again, Mrs. Conley, our business administrator. Basically what we're gonna do this evening is, if you remember last year, we had, somebody from the county come and speak with us about what it meant, what the implications were. We are not gonna revisit that whole presentation, because all of you were here for that, but what we will do is run through, what our options are, what we're looking at. The board will be in a position where you will need to make a decision as to whether or not you are interested in going with one of the exemptions, and if you are, what level of exemption. And then the final decision then would be prior to March 1st, because you would have to do this by March 1st. You would have to think about when you would want to do the public hearing and adopt the resolution as a board to move forward with the exemption. So you've had a lot of the background information, but we just want to revisit it and come to terms with some decisions, so.
Yes, the last time this was presented was by Nancy DiLeonardo from Erie County Real Property. So when Dr. Chavy told me that we wanted to just revisit it briefly, update the numbers, because it's been some time since she came out here, and to have the discussion, I reached out to her and I just asked her to basically put this together. So I'm not gonna go in as much detail as she did the last time. It's very much the same, it's just because of where our assessment numbers are. Some of the impact might have changed slightly on this. So I'm gonna really just focus on a couple different levels of the exemption that we could adopt. It's important for me to emphasize too, this is not the public hearing. This is just a discussion that the board is going to have, and I'm just providing you a little bit of an update on the information. The next steps would be that the board, if they wanted to move forward with this, they would have a public hearing, and then ultimately, if they decided, again, it's up to the board to decide if they're gonna go with this or not, you would have to adopt a resolution. Just one other little thing too, if we do this prior to March 1st, it would be then effective for next year's school taxes, not the current year. So again, I'm just gonna skip ahead, because all of this is virtually the same as Nancy went over before with the board. It's a different. Okay. So what she has here, and some of the slides, I apologize, there was a typo that was found later this evening. So we did try to catch it in some of them, but the board, you might have it still originally. So the exemption level that we're talking about on this particular slide down here is actually $18,000, $30,000, and $60,000. I think some might say 12. So you could just make that change. The calculations and everything are correct, but just those levels are different. The $18,000, $30,000, and $60,000 level, that is similar to what the county and the town have adopted. So she used this in some of the examples here. So what would that do? What does it mean? A non-combat vet is eligible for up to $18,000 exemption. A combat vet is eligible for an additional $12,000 to total the $30,000. And then a disabled vet is eligible up to a $60,000 exemption amount for this particular level, which is referred to as Vet Group E on their schedule for the real property. Amherst has a current equalization rate of 97%, and there's currently 899 veterans that have the alternative vet exemption, and they would be eligible for if the district did adopt this particular exemption. So for Amherst, that means $20,794,904. And then 213 veterans in the school district that currently have the pro rata veteran exemption could apply for those. So we don't know if they will, but they could. And a rough estimate for those 213 would be $6,390,000 in a reduction of their taxable assessed value, if they receive the maximum amount. And then 52 Cold War veterans in the district would not be eligible for the exemption. So an example, with our equalization rate of 97%, and if we adopted the $18,000 cap on wartime, $30,000 on combat, and $60,000 on disabled, the capped amounts would then be $17,460, $29,100, and $58,200, because it's 97% of those caps. So an example, on an assessed value property of $130,000, if the owner qualified for combat veteran exemption, it's equal to 25% or $29,100, whichever is less. So 25% of that would be $32,500. $32,500 exceeds that $29,100, so the exemption amount would be $29,100, which would then make a new assessed value of $100,900. And that's the taxable value for which the school taxes would be calculated. So the effect on the school budget, it basically redistributes the levy. Our tax levy is still our tax levy, so it would be redistributed to those without the exemption. They would be taking over that portion. The STAR reimbursement amount could be less due to the decreased taxable value, and the lost STAR reimbursement would be represented also in a higher tax rate, so it does impact the rate. So the effect on a school tax bill. There's two parcels, these are just a couple examples. 2 parcels in the district are assessed for $130,000 each. The equalization rate is 97%. So in the first scenario, the district does not opt in for the alternative veterans exemption. The taxable values are $507,777,17. And then this is our current tax levy, $34,153,763. So in this case, we have the levy divided by the taxable value times 1,000, $22.65 is the tax rate. Both parcels have no exemption, so the tax bill for $130,000 assessed value would be $2,944.50. So we do opt in for that alternative exemption at the level of $18,000, $30,000, and $60,000. The capped amounts, because of our 97% equalization, would be, as we discussed previously, the total taxable values decrease to $1,486,982,113. The levy remains the same. So then we take our levy divided by that new assessed value times 1,000. So you can see it would go to $22.97. So an increase of 32 cents by adopting that level of exemption. And it's a 1.41% tax increase, or 32 cents. One parcel qualifies for the maximum combat vet exemption of $29,100. The other parcel still has no exemption. So the bill with the parcel with the exemption would be $2,317 versus the bill without the exemption on that particular parcel would be $2,986.10. So a $41.60 tax bill increase for those without the exemption, and the one with the exemption would be a $626.83 decrease. Scenario 3, this is at a different level, not the one that we just discussed, the 18, 30, and 60, but rather going with a lower level exemption of $6,000, $10,000, and $20,000. So based on our equalization rate again of 97%, you would have capped amounts of $5,820, $9,700, or $19,400. The reduction in the taxable assessed value would be $7,691,275. Again, the tax levy, the school district levy remains the same at 34 million. So the tax rate would then be $22.77, a 0.53% increase, or 12-cent increase. One parcel qualifies for the maximum combat vet exemption of $9,700, the other does not. So a comparison of one with the exemption, one without the exemption. The one with the exemption, based on that same example as we did before, $205.27, and then the one without the exemption would see an increase of $15.60. So the STAR savings, again, this is what we currently have, a basic of $653 and $1,308 in pants. We don't know the impact this would have at all on STAR. None of the school districts know that impact on the STAR. It's just something that we need to keep in mind, that we may see a decrease in our STAR, which would then, like I said, increase the tax rate.
Can you, you have these laid out as scenarios, can you equate those to the different levels, the A, C, and E?
Yes, yeah, the lower level, the 6,000, 10,000, and 20,000 is referred to as level C.
Okay.
The first one, 18,000, 30,000, and 60,000 is level E, and that's currently what the county and the town have. Now, the highest level a school district can adopt is level K. You can't go any higher than that.
Just kind of like, is the tax, is the level that the town adopts, that's dictated though, right, by the state? They don't-
Correct.
So there's no choice in levels?
They don't have a
It's
choice.
dictated?
Right, it's set for them.
And
That's the 18, 30, and 60.
The E level?
Yes.
Looks like the towns around us are pretty evenly split with the A, C, and E.
Yes.
There's 7, 7, and 8 on the list that we have.
Right.
So it's like,
The schools, yeah.
that's what I mean, yeah, what did I say?
Town.
The town.
Well, I meant the schools in the town
Oh,
around
okay.
us.
So if there is an effect on the STAR exemption, and we need to make that up, then that affects, again, you know, we're always talking about going up against the tax cap,
Correct.
you know, so that would be another thing that would pressure us to,
Well, it's separate from the tax cap for the school district. The tax cap is when we set our budget. This is something separate and distinct that would impact the tax rate. But with us and the tax cap, this matter does not impact that. That would be separate.
With towns that adopted this in 2000, you know, so it took effect for the school bill that was due last month, would they have a feel for how it
I can
affected their
check.
STAR
I
or
can check to
something?
see if they've seen any change in their STAR with some of the other schools that may have already adopted it last year. Yeah, I can check on that to see.
I guess the decision really comes down to the board making a decision as to whether or not they feel that this is something that we should be including as part of our tax preparation, and if so, what level? I mean, if you feel at this point you need a little bit more information in terms of levels, but you do have to make a decision relatively quick, only because you need to have a public hearing, and you probably would like to do this by March 1st, so you have an impact next year maybe, that's really up to you. But I think the purpose of doing this now is we were toying with it last year, and, you know, made the decision to kind of see where we were and have the discussion this year. As you know, many areas around us have had the discussion as well, so.
I thought we were doing this to decide whether or not we were gonna move forward. We
Right,
haven't
that's what I'm
public
saying,
hearing.
right.
I thought that us making a decision before a public hearing doesn't make an awful lot
Wasn't
of
the
sense
public
to me.
hearing to propose what the board is presenting?
Correct.
It's not to
So-
make the decision.
So the board would
it's
have to
present.
determine what level they would want the public hearing
Correct.
to be on.
That just gives the public the opportunity to ask questions about what the board will be making their decision on. It's not making a decision after the public hearing. The decision really has to be made, if I might maybe unless I'm misunderstanding, the decision really has to be made prior to the public hearing, because that's what you're presenting to the public, is what the board is proposing.
The level that they would propose,
Yeah.
correct. So the board would ultimately decide on what level they'd like to consider. You'd have a public hearing, you would need to then decide, do you wanna move forward with it? And then the resolution.
So let me ask another question. If, once you implement it, you,
It remains.
what?
It remains from, when Nancy was
So
here,
if you start with the lower level,
Mhm.
you could always increase it the out year, but you can't decrease it?
correct, that's what I understood from Nancy the last time she was here, is once you opt for a certain level, you can't rescind it or reduce it.
So there's something to be said for starting at a certain level and then increasing it the following year after we are, you know, get the feedback from people, which,
See what the true impact is on
yeah,
assessment.
and what happens with STAR, and, you know, I mean, it does look like maybe Attica, at this point, you know, who did it in February of 2014, maybe they do know, but, you know, see what happens, you know, see what the fallout is, and what the true impact is. Because we can always increase it the following year.
I think we have to decide, one of the things that we need to do here is decide if we are going to even move forward with an exemption. And then we have to decide, if we do decide to do that, then we have to decide at what level.
I don't know how we do that tonight, though, without having the information on what the levels are. We only have some of the levels.
We do
We
have
have-
the levels.
we
Yeah,
have
we have
those.
those at the presentation originally.
And we sent it out to
They
board.
were sent in a bulletin. I think it's an interesting, issue, because there's two really important competing principles. One is that we want to keep our taxes low for everyone. The other is we want to respect the great sacrifices of our veterans have made for us. And so I think that's where the dilemma comes in. It's not that we want to ignore our veterans or that we want to ignore our taxpayers, but there's a value in respecting both those competing principles. We also have to remember that we have done a non-binding exit poll for 2 years, and in both those years, we have had more than 50% of our respondents respond that they would be in favor of a tax exemption. So that's just something to think about as you contemplate where we want to go with this.
You don't have to decide the level tonight necessarily, but I do think there has to be some level of commitment as to whether or not you wanna look at choosing to do
It's
this. And yeah, I mean, we've been toying with this for over a year now, and is it something philosophically you wanna toy with, and then you want more information specifically before you commit to a level, that's certainly a reasonable request. But I think to make the decision to either do it or not do it, if you're not gonna do it, then there's no sense in having us do more work to figure out what that would look like. We have a pretty good idea of what those numbers would represent based on the different examples that we've been given and some of the handouts from the past. So that's I think the most important thing this evening. And then if we set a date for the public hearing so that you can schedule accordingly and work within that time frame, and then maybe in a meeting or two, if you want more information about the level, determine what that level would be so that Mrs. Conley can prepare for the public hearing.
So far, the piece that I have for more information is just checking with other districts that have adopted it, if they noticed an impact on their STAR exemption, or STAR revenue, I should say. Was there any other information? Any other information do you need from?
Well, I would like to look at this prior to sitting at a meeting that we're, without having it ahead of time. I mean, you may have seen this months ago, but I didn't see this in the board bulletin.
Those levels
These
weren't,
levels.
the levels were not in the board bulletin, but they were in the presentation.
That was in the board bulletin.
I didn't see it.
Yeah,
I didn't see it either.
yeah.
Well, it doesn't, either way, if you don't feel like you have enough information, then that's fine. I mean, we certainly can do that, but I guess the question still remains, how do you feel about the idea of moving forward to, with the veterans exception, and then deciding on a later date?
You may have
Should we poll people and see how they feel about moving forward on this?
Or just get a consensus?
Right, consensus or consensus,
I do think that the issue with the star exemption is a big deal. I mean, that's another huge amount of money that it would be nice to know from some of these, you know, whether it did impact their star or not. Maybe it doesn't. If it doesn't, then it's kind of a moot point, and we're really just looking at the numbers that we've been given. If that's the case, and there's no other impact that we're not aware of, then I personally would be, in favor of starting at the lowest level for the first year. Given the fact that we have asked the taxpayers, and they have said that they are in favor of it.
Okay, split.
so you're,
It wasn't split, it was like, it was well over 50%, I thought.
62.5.
Yeah.
Okay, so. Okay, Ms. Goldhar?
I agree with Jean. But, I'd like to see the information, if there's any information about the star. And, I do think, you know, the lower levels would be more palatable to start with.
I would concur.
I think we should move forward.
One of the advantages of not really committing to a level is that we're not all here, but if we could put on an agenda soon to kind of come to some conclusion. And at that point, I think, what with the new information, then we really need to commit to a level. So since we do have, support for moving forward.
Very good.
Thank you.
The next item is really, it's just kind of, I guess, relatively quick. It's about the high school capital work. Last week ago, a week and a half ago, we did the tour of the high school building just so that you would have an opportunity to really get a first-hand look at some of the spaces and some of our concerns with those spaces. And we said that we would have a brief discussion tonight just about where we were on those issues and how we're feeling about that and what we think the next steps should be in terms of perhaps looking at some future capital work for that project. And one thing I heard when we were walking around is, and this, I guess this is a lot of discussion, is I think it's pretty clear that some of those spaces really are in dire need of some facelifts and making them 21st century learning spaces, and both on the building condition survey side as well as the educational side. So, I mean, my recommendation would be, based on what we saw, that perhaps what you think about doing is charging the capital committee to reconvene, to look at two separate aspects. One would obviously be the building condition survey, which we completed last year. We're required to do that every 5 years, as well as some of the programmatic things that we've been collecting. Do their due diligence, come up with some potential recommendations based on some of the information, bring it back to the board. It probably would be late spring, quite honestly, by the time they get through everything, to discuss some potential future projects. Give Mrs. Conley time to look at financial implications, all of that, and come to you with a good, thorough analysis so that you can make a decision whether it's next year at this time or the May vote in 2017 or later to possibly put forth something, your next project in that area. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay.
It's clear that building, tremendous work comes out of that building, and I've had 2 children go through, they loved the experience. I have to say, I was absolutely amazed that, I have never heard one bad word about that building, but it is showing its age. And I think it's a real testament to all of the teachers and administrators there that the children go there, they love it, they learn, they're well behaved, and they succeed. Despite the fact that the building is, a little long in the tooth. I mean, it's really, it's a real testament to all of you, and you should be very, very proud of what comes out of that building.
I wasn't there, and I'm on the capital committee, and haven't been to the meeting yet, so hopefully we reconvene it. But I can't see why we wouldn't include the new superintendent in this process.
Absolutely.
It makes no sense to me not to do that.
Right, and I
I mean,
think
unless
that's
that
why,
thing's falling down.
I think that's why Dr. Chavy is suggesting that you take a long look at a building that's in need right now. But you're absolutely right, it's not in a position where we need to make changes that would be before you superintendent.
Absolutely.
And got settled in.
There were a couple of things that were a little concerning, that looked like they could
That
cause
railing was a little
injury.
bit scary.
And some of the floors are not safe. I mean, there were some things, but I'll show you the pictures, down there, but like the one room upstairs, I mean, there's ceiling tiles falling off. You know, there were some things that absolutely need to be addressed, but I don't think it can't wait till the capital committee convenes and discusses it further.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there has to be that vision created by whoever's sitting in the seat as well as the rest of the teams and working together to get towards that. No question about it. All right, you're welcome. Let's see. It helps if we put my glasses on, doesn't it? The next conversation really is about the student participation on the Board of Education, and I tried to send to you prior to this discussion as much information as we could find just in terms of what that means, what it looks like in other districts, what some of the requirements are. I know this was something that was brought up by one of our students last year, so I don't know, Dr. Carousel, if you want to talk a little bit about that too, in terms of what the board's interest is. Basically, it would require voter approval as part of the budget vote. Some schools do 1 representative, some schools do 2. There's a selection process that's determined really by the board or by a subcommittee designated by the board of who that individual would be. And then it would be up to the voters to approve whether or not you would have a student serving as sort of as more of a facilitator and not really a voting member, a liaison to the student body. Not necessarily here, they can't vote, they don't go into executive session, they're not involved in those kinds of decisions, but really as a liaison to represent the students. And it's something that was brought to our attention last year. So maybe that too is something, as you have a new superintendent coming on board, you might want to assess their interest as well, and what that would look like and how you might want to move forward with that, I don't know. But it's open for discussion now, if you'd like to discuss it, if you'd like to table it and decide that this is something you think would be important. It's really, we just wanted to make sure.
It would have to be voted on in May.
It would have to be part of your board, yes. And then every 2 years. And then every 2 years you have to bring it forth. And you could decide after 2 years to not do it again.
I'd be interested to know, Max Medwin brought it to us a couple of times, and I appreciated his effort on that behalf, but do we have other students that are interested in doing it, or it was just something that he was championing?
No, I think you have students chomping at the bit.
Okay,
We do.
okay.
I bet if we reached out to the high school and looked at some of our students, they would want to participate, for sure.
Is the voter approval needed because we would have somebody sitting at the table? Is that different than maybe having a student rep come and attend our meetings on a regular basis and then asking for input, how does
That's a
that?
good point. Yeah, because they actually are being asked to sit at the table, so they would have to be approved to have that representation. I mean, probably the flip side of that is if they aren't approved as being part of the board, again, I don't know what their level of commitment would be to be here every month or every 2 weeks. Interesting idea though, to just.
I know that when they sit at the table, they are allowed to participate in the conversation.
Correct.
They can't vote.
But if they are just a representative that sits in the audience, obviously they're, they don't have that.
That's a great distinction.
Mhm.
That's right, that's a great distinction. If they're in the audience, they can't have it, because they have to be part of your meeting. That's right, this case is not a public meeting, it's your meeting being held in the public.
Did we ever find out what the other districts do? I mean, I know Hamburg does it.
The
Sure.
information, I
Sweet
spoke
Homes.
with Hamburg and I spoke with Sweet Homes, and, Sweet Home was very, very happy with, the idea that they have a student representative. But I think we also have to go back and talk about some of the ways, that student representatives are envisioned in districts. If you looked at the board bulletin, there were two very different views of what a student rep was, and if I can recall them, because I only wrote down some notes on one of them. One was more of a liaison, where it was kind of one was more of a consultant during the board meeting, where they sat at the table and you would turn to them and say, Ms. Jones, what do you think about this issue? The other, in my reading, was that they were more of a liaison and a two-way connection. So they would give a report about what was going on in the high school. They would also report back to the high school about what was going on in the boardroom. And another way I thought, full disclosure, I have a senior. I never ask his advice. I never ask what he thinks about anything, because I know he's only one person. And that's my concern about having someone sitting at the board table and saying, Ms. Jones, what do you think? But maybe one way that they could be very useful is the way that they were when we had our concern about backpacks, where we asked a question of these people and of these students, and they went back and surveyed or solicited thoughts from the larger community. So I think there's a lot of things to think about if we move forward. To get back to your question, both Hamburg and Sweet Home really enjoyed their student reps. I think that Sweet Homes I think they're both more of the, I think it was the first scenario I gave you, where they don't just, but they sit at the table and are asked for input at the table. But I do think that another really valuable way is to have that two-way interaction, where it's more of a liaison as well as a consultant. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good idea, I just, it's a question of what form and what time it is. So,
I don't necessarily think we need to hold off on this decision for a new superintendent.
No,
I think that it's the board's decision, and that's choosing whether we want to have that person as part of the board. So I don't think we need, if we wait for a new superintendent, we're going to delay this another whole year. If it's something we want to implement.
I think there's some value in it, personally, to be able to allow them to hear from our students and have them, I like the idea of them learning input to bring back to you, so they aren't just representing their own position. Just as you do as board members, you don't just represent your own positions, you try and represent what your constituent groups are and what you represent as a whole. And that would be another learning curve for them, that they are now one of 8, and that's part of their role as well in terms of when you serve in this kind of an office. That ultimately, when a decision is made, I know they can't vote on it, but understanding that there has to be consensus and listening and all of those things that you do as board members. So.
And that they're one of 800.
And that they're one of 800, exactly.
That's the other part.
That's the other part of it. Correct. So, yeah, I think it's a really interesting idea. On a very personal level, I've always enjoyed when students are involved and the interaction that you can have with students, and they often teach me a lot more than anybody else can about certain things and provide some really interesting insight into their world. And that's who we are serving. We are serving our students, so.
And I agree with Dr. Chavy. I think that this is something we should move forward with.
Well, you can, yeah, you have 2 more members, maybe you want to wait at least till you have a full board, but I think it's up to you. for if you're comfortable with it, or you wanna give it a little bit of thought, but I would suggest, just like the veterans exemption, it's something if you're gonna do, that in the next month or so you make a definitive decision, so that we can begin to prepare to move forward on soliciting the information that you have to.
I also think we need to think about what format.
What
it would
format
be,
you
and
want.
I don't know whether that requires,
Create like a subcommittee or something.
another subcommittee.
Another subcommittee.
Yeah,
Perhaps we can ask Mr. Pigeon and,
That was my issue with timing
yeah.
and the things that we're doing in order to take it out.
well, you know, if you think about the timing of it, if we choose to move, if we have a short meeting and choose to move forward with this when we have 7 people, we can wait until after the big rush for the superintendency is over. We could do this in March
What is
and
the,
be prepared for the vote in May.
Just as long as it's part of the vote today.
Well,
so we have
I
to
mean,
go beginning of April,
you know, we can
Just in
create,
time. All you're doing is creating the position. Yeah.
Yeah, all your,
but,
right.
I mean, if you look at the documents that we saw, you know, from the different school districts and policies and the structure, I mean, some of that, you know, could get in pretty good detail, and, you know, I wouldn't wanna make those decisions all just, you know, after a meeting in March and have it done without, you know, getting the student input and Mr. Pigeon's input and.
It's almost
you know,
something that we
I
as the
think-
board can't do by ourselves.
I don't
We
think
need
so.
some extra,
No,
we
I
need
would
some
think you would wanna
outside help.
serve.
I mean, I think we should decide if we wanna do it and then, you know,
Start that process.
I do think if we're gonna make a fundamental change though, we should have all 7 of us here.
Okay, I think that's a really good way to go. And I can even see a lot of work being done in an hour to 2-hour meeting some afternoon.
There's enough background information where you
Mr.
can
Pigeon runs a
cross-reference
good
that.
meeting.
He runs a
Yeah.
great
He's a
meeting, doesn't he?
taskmaster.
He is.
Yeah.
That's what I hear.
He is.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to, Ms. Custodio, you're gonna have a long list of follow-up actions, and basically, we're not making many decisions tonight. I apologize.
We're getting there.
We're getting closer to making decisions, how about that? Okay, good job, good discussion, okay.
The last piece is the transportation discussion, and basically what this involves is, I know previously there was some conversations about, efficiencies in terms of transportation. We had a very viable asset transportation committee. We have had a couple members go off, we've had some changes in leadership at some of our membership from our non-public schools. But of course, there's always still a desire to look at options related to transportation for efficiencies. And so, again, I think my recommendation at this point is to really reconvene that committee. And I know something like having our own fleet was discussed, for example, and what would be involved in looking at that is very, very comprehensive and complicated, and there's a ton of information. So to try and do that at this table and share that information, we'd be here all night to do that. So if that's really something you're interested in, I would say then, let's reconvene the transportation committee. Again, let's have Mrs. Conley take the lead, get the membership back on board, to really designate what the 1 or 2 or 3 items are that you would like to look at in terms of efficiencies and see how feasible they are and what it would involve. And again, as you've done in the past, come back to the board with recommendations. That structure seems to work really well. We were able to make some good conclusions and some conclusions that weren't gonna work over the last 3 years through that model. So, what I need to assess is, I know that Monica and Maureen, you were on the committee, if you're still interested in serving as the board reps, or if anybody else is instead, or in addition to. If not, then we'll continue with that.
that's so interesting.
Can I just ask a question? If the committee doesn't exist, who sent this out? This came home with my daughter today from school. And it's a parent survey about walking and biking to school.
Oh, that was
That's the
part
Safe
of the
Routes to
Safe
Schools
Routes to
grant.
School grant. We got that 2 years ago. That's a totally different issue. We
Okay.
happen to be involved in that with the transportation committee, but it's the town that's really doing that.
Okay.
There was
got
a
it.
That had a
and that's the
right?
post
Yes.
survey.
Part of the-
Yes.
Okay, got
So,
They're doing a comparison
Yep.
of the two. Yep, yeah.
With the new sidewalks
yes.
Yes.
and that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Okay,
Exactly.
gotcha.
The whole idea was to encourage
Correct.
exercise, and walking, and biking.
Because that may be something you discern, I mean,
There were new, like, signs put up and new, you know, street
Sidewalks
markings
and
and, yeah.
all of that, right?
Yeah.
Right. So Dr. Lewis made sure that it got some. Good question, though. I can see where that would be very confusing, where that came from.
that's the direction the board would like to go, then we will do that. And maybe the best thing for you to do as a follow-up, Mrs. Stody, is to have the board then identify to Melanie that she can share with the Transportation Committee any ideas that you might have for things that you would like the Transportation Committee to maybe consider looking at in terms of efficiencies. We have a couple ideas, but there may be some others that we haven't thought of. So if you can feed that information back to either me or Debbie, and we'll make sure that Melanie gets it, that would be helpful. Okay? I think I've talked enough tonight.
I don't really, we have done a lot in an
Yes.
hour. I'm really impressed.
Decided on-
Very
we've
impressed.
decided to-
That's probably why.
We made some,
Oh, well.
pretty close. Pretty close to some decisions.
Okay, we're ready for new business. Anyone like to make a motion for new business?
I'll make a motion for new business items 1A through D, 2A through F, 3C, D, F, I, and K.
Do I hear a second? Okay, Mr. Vivola, any discussion? Before we vote on this, I have to acknowledge a very, with regret, 2E, we are accepting the resignation for purposes of retirement. Our very important Mr. Wolf, our technology coordinator, he will be very, very, very much missed. And we wish him well. Okay. All those in favor of new business items I1A through D, I2A through F, I3C, D, F, I, and K, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Motion's carried. All right. Are there any visitors wishing to speak at this time? Go ahead. Let's give Ms.
Sure.
Snyder.
Hi, Karen Snyder, Lamarck Drive. One thing, I respectfully ask the board if they would like to ask the kids or the teachers about the conditions of things at the high school. We'd be happy to share that with you. There are lots of things that need to be fixed and replaced at the high school. It is a very old building. But even I look at these shades, and I would like those in some of the classrooms because some of the shades are, they're just, it's very sad looking. And as far as the property tax exemption availability, I would please ask that the board look at that issue based on the principles of fairness. This was designed, Cuomo put this out and he wants it to go through, but he is leaving it up to school districts to make this decision. And to me, it feels like it's pitting neighbor against neighbor, and that's not what an exemption is supposed to be doing. And it certainly shouldn't be based on our perceptions of each other's intrinsic principles or belief systems at all. So I please just ask you that, to consider it on those principles of fairness. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gramke?
Yes, Jim Gramke, Weston Road. Two kind of follow-up comments from the public meeting. As it relates to the turf, I would suggest that the board look into seeing whether or not it does qualify as a capital improvement. I know we've been talking about this for a couple of years, and there is some question. I talked to one of the auditors in the controller's office this week, and he couldn't even give me a definitive answer as to what qualifies as a capital project, but there should be a way to find out. And the reason I'm stressing that is because if it were to qualify, the state would pay 76%, assuming that rate holds. So that would be saving the district some money and freeing up some money. And then just a comment that with the presentation, it was just a little disappointing that there wasn't more detail as to why we had the cost overruns and the changes in the project, and we're looking at another $4.5 million. The people in the district are very supportive of the board and the district, and I just think that they should get a little more information before being asked to vote on a $4.5 million project, and then there'll be more capital projects coming up in the future. And again, I want to reiterate that when and if the capital committee does reconvene, if you could make those meetings open to the public so that they can at least observe them. Thank you.
Okay, follow-up action items include, oh, I know.
Ms. Conley to check on the effect of the veterans exemption that it had on the STAR program in districts that have already implemented it. Add the veterans exemption discussion to a board meeting in the near future. Convene the capital committee. Add student participation to a board meeting in the near future where all seven members are present. Schedule a meeting with Mr. Pigeon, students and board members to discuss a potential format for a student on the board. And the board to identify ideas that you want the transportation committee to review.
Do we need to set that meeting now? With the Mr. Pigeon students, and I think that would be something that would be set up once we decide if we want.
Right, that's a good point.
So should I
Decide
take
what we
that off?
want, yeah, we'll decide first and then follow up. Right, yeah, that's a good point.
Put that on the list of follow-up.
Okay.
The parking lot to the parking lot.
Parking lots to the parking lot.
But just don't forget it.
It's the match parking lot.
Very good.
The long
Good
term.
recall there.
All right, any other, items that, would like to be considered for future agendas? Do I have a motion to convene to executive session?
I'll make a motion to convene to executive session for matters regarding employment or future retirement of a certain individual.
I'll second it.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.